I'm wondering, Michael.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, me over
I
here.
see you. Lights? No, we're good.
So I'm wondering, as far as like, kind of the moments when we begin the practice,
Yeah.
like before we've even generated the visualization, we're doing the refuge prayer.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that we're visualizing, even though we haven't generated the official visualization, we are visualizing Chengrezig in the sky with, and all sentient beings are gathered with us as we say the refuge prayer. Is that correct?
Well, it's not wrong. In this particular pecha, usually we visualize Chenrezi in the in a step that comes along through a few stages. But there's other Chenrezi practices where you visualize Chenrezi in the beginning and then proceed certain ways. And I know that Khenpo Rinpoche has said also that you can visualize yourself as Chenrezi from the very beginning and just proceed in that way. So it's helpful, I think, sometimes to recall that in essence you are Chenrezi already before you begin the practice. Even if you've never done the practice, it's the nature of mind itself is cannot be improved. So we're not actually engaging in the practice in order to improve the nature of mind, but in order to recognize that nature. So it's an important distinction to make. Whether you visualize Chenrezi in the beginning or in the process of the way it's laid out in the practice text may not be that important. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I have a follow-up. So there's different...
Point that right at your
Sorry.
mouth.
There's different
Good.
ways to... Like I could do Chenrezi as a shamatha practice. I could do it as a loving kindness practice. Like if I was visualizing someone, in front of me who's sick or dying.
Yeah.
Would there be any difference in what I might call to mind before I start the practice, besides, trying to acknowledge that I am already Chenrezi? Like if I were doing Chenrezi for someone, say, would you set an intention for the practice that would be different than if you were doing it more as like a, kind of a shamatha thing where you're focusing on just the visualization, say, all through the practice? Are there different things that how you would, I guess, set your mind in the beginning or not?
Yeah. There could be. But my own personal inclination is to recall the times all the way back into the 70s when we were with Kala Rinpoche, that on a number of occasions he said that the entire Dharma, all of its aspects of it, every last little piece of it could be discovered in every piece of it. So in other words, it underscored something that I think I didn't hear it from him very often because probably it felt confusing a little bit. Like, where do I start, for example? So many of us we needed a kind of an exact step-by-step path. And then there's others, like renegades like myself. Even if I get a step-by-step path, I'll go some other route. So it's like, there's no proof that that's a better direction. It's just that that's the way we individually have proclivities like that. So it's important. It's important to, if you can understand something about the text and about the practice, if you can just understand something really clear, you have a good foothold. So, for example, we often say that the container of Chenrezig is the four immeasurables. We also often say that Chenrezig itself is the container for the four immeasurables. So it really doesn't ask us to determine which one is true, but rather to see that they all contain the truth of the practice, the value of the practice. And in the end, it's all contained in recognizing our own true nature, which is also Chenrezig. So if you can not move into a confused place where you're trying to link all those things together in a conceptual framework, if you succeed at doing that, it's worse. Because the conceptual framework is actually not where, I want to say, where the power lies. It lies in our experience. That's what's important. So when we start Chenrezig, and let's say you want to do the practice for someone, then let's imagine that you have some reason why you want to do it for that person. Maybe the reason is that they're dying, or maybe they're confused, maybe they're insane, or maybe they do negative things, and so you want to do the practice for them so that maybe they will be disinclined to do negative things. You could make a list really quite long, right, of why you might want to do it for someone or some group of people. From our own perspective as a practitioner, we start from the place, if not from the very beginning, very early on in the text, we become Chenrezig. We don't really become Chenrezig. So sometimes we talk loosely like that, including myself. We're not really meant to think that we become Chenrezig. We're more meant to have the experience that we are Chenrezig. The becoming piece sometimes becomes an obstacle. We then start asking ourselves, when do I become? I've been doing this practice for how long, and I'm not Chenrezig yet. So what we've really done is place a large obstacle there where we're never going to find the nature of mind, because we've already determined that we somehow have to make some change in order to find it, when the change is just a simple recognition of it already being there.
Thank you.
The complication of it needs to be put aside, which is why I said if you can find something that you personally relate to, that you can connect with it, where you can have some confidence in that little piece, sometimes you can unfold the entire thing from that little piece. And while many people will say that's a dangerous way to go, I think that's true in some practices. I think in the practice of Chenrezig, it's totally not true. Like, unfold it in the best way that you can from the piece that you understand, and we'll fix it as we go forward.
Hi, Michael. Can you say a little bit more about what makes Chenrezig benign and other practices like maybe Mahakala risky to do variants of?
How Chenrezig is benign?
Yeah, and versus, because they're just visual, in some sense they're just visualization and chance, each different kind of practice. And what is the difference there? I don't quite have a handle on that.
I think if you start from a slightly different point, which I think you would have if you thought about it in a certain way, why would we think that one practice is benign and another isn't? Well, you and I both know why we might think that, because some of the practices we call wrathful practices, and they contain a lot of imagery which can be experienced as, let's say, dangerous. But dangerous things are sometimes helpful. The fact that they're dangerous itself doesn't mean that they're negative. But if you throw knives at people, that may be harmful. But if you scare somebody who's about to harm someone else, that could be helpful. So some of the practices contain methods for dealing with difficult situations. When we look at it closely from the perspective of studying them from a long time and doing them from a long time, we discover that mostly, if someone is going to be hurt, it's the practitioner. And if someone else is hurt, it's by virtue of the relationship with the practitioner who has made mistakes. So for that reason, we tend to sometimes isolate those practices. Like, as you're familiar with, you have certain requirements in order to gain the instructions, and in order to continue with certain practices, it's meant to isolate the situation so that you can make mistakes and experience the consequences when they're not always so good, but they're not so bad that you can't do something to recover from them. So that it's why we begin with practices like Chengrezig, where there's nothing in them that would be harmful, that could be harmful. So in truth, of course, we're human beings, and so we also are too smart for our own goods sometimes. So we could say that the most benign practice in its appearance could actually be not so benign. So if we start with the other end of it, leave the Vajrayana aspect with the visualizations and all of those things aside, it's very difficult to adapt the four immeasurables, which is really the essence of Chengrezig and the essence of a great many practices. Some say the essence of all the practices. It's very difficult, as long as you stay within the four immeasurables, it's very difficult for something to go wrong. But when you're engaging in wrathful practices, which are still the basis of the four immeasurables, or the four immeasurables are the base of it, it's possible for things to go wrong by virtue of our misunderstanding. I'm not sure if that addresses
That helps, yeah.
your...
Thank you.
I think that is a complicated, sufficiently complicated issue that it would always be helpful to inquire, to ask that question of people who you trust, you know, like Kempo Rinpoche and others who maybe are studying on that particular thing, to be able to go to your teacher, who should be someone that you appreciate and trust and have some respect for. Then that person should be able to give a kind of robust explanation of this and how to avoid the negative sides. And okay.
So, just as we were getting started, I heard in the conversation the word addiction.
Addiction.
Addiction, yeah. And I know it's a strong word, maybe medically doesn't, like maybe I won't get that diagnosis, but it seems somehow, in milder forms appropriate in daily life. I'll just maybe use the word habits, bad habits,
Yeah.
or unproductive, not useful, maybe time wasters.
What was the last thing you said?
Maybe a habit that feels internally as though I'm wasting
Yes.
time.
Yeah, yeah. You feel that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Can you give an example?
Like a game on the computer.
Oh, yeah.
I just so I'm conflicted about that because it doesn't seem that awful.
Yeah. But you want.
But I still don't have I don't have a settled relationship with it.
Yeah.
That would be an example.
But it stands in the way of something else you want to do.
You like to be alive in some way. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe nothing in particular, but, the overall experience isn't as fulfilling as...
Yeah. So, what's the issue?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I
Yeah.
mean, the issue is that, on one, there's a part of the mind that says, hey, just stop. Don't do that anymore.
Yeah. Well, sometimes that works. This is just the normal way we are as sentient beings. We have hopes and aspirations for things, a myriad of things. It would be hard to nail it down to one thing, but we also give those aspirations up periodically. Some people tend to be more able to stick with things and carry through. That doesn't guarantee that it's a good thing. Could be that you don't get distracted, but after some significant amount of time, you feel disappointed that the result from all your effort well directed and focused, maybe didn't bear the fruit that you really hoped that it would bear. So I think that's a big piece of what we value in the context of the Dharma, is that the things that are valuable can easily be found through those methods. Things that are valuable. But in order to find them, we have to expand our view of things. So normally our view is pretty small, especially the example we often use is that the most important thing in my life is me. Me. Myself. The most important thing. And at various times in our lives, starting from when we're really quite young, that is the most important thing. And little by little we find out that other things could be more important, but still we are in a state of kind of confusion. We're looking for things in our life, hoping that they will lead to some kind of contentment, some kind of happiness for ourselves, and it doesn't occur. Or it does occur, and then it doesn't occur, and then it occurs, and then it doesn't occur. And so we have this kind of push and pull, which leads to a kind of deep dissatisfaction. It's helpful to recognize that process. The hard thing for many of us is to think that there's some value in recognizing the confusion itself. But it's kind of like we keep slipping and falling on the ice just outside our house, for example, in the winter. We keep slipping and falling on it. And when we see the ice, we just hate the ice. But actually, we're not really seeing the issue here. The issue is that we ignore the danger and just walk onto the ice again and fall down. So in order to be free of the causes of suffering at all levels, first we have to recognize the causes. First we have to recognize that we are suffering. And recognizing the causes along with recognizing the suffering, we then are in a position to do something really useful, where the energy of the slipping and falling down and feeling unhappy about ourselves, chastising ourselves, feeling stupid for always falling down on the ice right outside the door, it can be the cause of the energy to overcome that and to do something else. Merely having a sense of dissatisfaction doesn't get us much. We actually have to do something in order for us to move from where we are to another place. And that's not so easy. But the first thing, however we get to it, is to recognize what it is that we're actually doing, or what we're not doing. We generally avoid that normally. I don't want to see what I'm not doing right. But we can't change it or can't drop it, can't leave it behind if we don't see it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Lama Michael,
Sanjay.
I think I've been practicing, I don't know how many years, 40 or 50, something like that. I've forgotten. But it wasn't until fairly recently that I started participating in the Lojong group. And
Oh yeah.
that was a huge shock because I mean, I've been doing Chengrezig and lots of practices and
You mean
so
Tim's
forth.
group?
Hmm?
Was it Tim's group that you were in, or was it something else? Not Tim's.
Tim Campbell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, is that?
Yeah, the Lojong that we're
Yeah.
doing every other week. But the idea that shocked me so much, I guess I missed it somehow. But as you were saying, that as from childhood, we are only concerned with me, me, and I think that we're probably all like that. But in Lojong, the teaching is so radical that we give up our me and put the benefit of all other beings before our own benefit. That just shocked the holy stuff out of me. And I mean, it's great. And we have Shanti Deva and Bodhisattva Samantabhadra's examples of that, which, you know, it's just unbelievable. And I don't know if it's even possible or attainable, but it's an amazing kind of goal to set everyone else's benefit before your own. So I just want to throw that in because it's,
Yeah.
I how did I miss that for 35 years?
You weren't looking in the right place. You weren't looking in the right place. Yeah.
Hello, Michael. I have a question about the prayer mudra.
Yeah.
So when visualizing the three jewels or visualizing the yidam, the prayer mudra feels very natural and compatible with what I'm doing.
Yes.
And in the long life prayers, it feels there's a little bit of an obstacle for me sometimes.
Little obstacle.
A little bit of an obstacle because it feels like I'm praying to something outside of myself for the long life of these
Yeah.
teachers. Could you speak to that for me?
Praying to something outside of yourself. In order for.
I think it brings up like my Catholic past. It feels a little bit like that, like I'm praying to
Yeah.
something outside
Not
of
quite
me.
your past is what you're saying.
Not entirely.
I mean, I say that only half jokingly, because the truth is, I think that there is a wide range of spiritual traditions that are worthy of appreciation, aside from the individuals within that tradition who may actually not get it at all. But the tradition itself may actually be quite rich. And I think all great traditions over time experience profoundly conflicted situations. And some of them rise out of it again and some don't. But I think that fundamentally the prayer mudra is a support for the prayer. So that's fundamentally what it is. We could put our hands in almost any way, though there's a bunch of things that one could learn about why you would do it this way. But more simply, it's just a matter of when you begin to recite something, we want to have a sense of appreciation. If we're reciting a long life prayer, we want to have some respect for the teachers that we're hoping will live longer, and to feel that wish, not just to state the wish, which is kind of conceptual, but to actually feel it is really important. And so the mudra, like all of the mudras really, in a kind of big way, they're a support for something. So I like to call them symbols, but there are many people in our Sangha who are offended by referring to the mudra as a symbol. So I appreciate that also. But I still feel like symbol is good. Symbol, if you look it up in the dictionary, is something that points to something other than itself. So it feels to me like, okay, this is not a prayer. But if I intentionally make it a support by thinking that when I bring my hands together and I pray for the long life of the great teachers, the fact that I bring my hands together reminds me of the appreciation that leads me to do that, reminds me of the respect for teachers that I've studied with and really appreciated, and reminds me of the great teachers who I've never met, never heard their name or anything, who many people are benefiting from right this very moment. So it's just kind of like, it's a way of reminding myself. Now I can walk down the street and recite the exact same prayer and have an experience that is as good as sitting here and using the prayer mudra. So it's not like you have to do that to get the result or deliver the result somehow. It's more an issue of the habit in this case. We more often talk about the downside of habits, but there are habits that are also really helpful. And it's helpful to know that it's a habit that's helpful. In other words, we're not just eliminating all habits, even if we could, but rather the habit of bringing my hands together in that prayer mudra supports something. And it's, personally, I find it better if I understand this is a habit that I intentionally appreciate because it keeps my mind on the wish for the long life of great beings. Simple. No big magic. On the other hand, you could say, this is the magic that we all engage in all the time. It's like Sonia, talking about mind training. Mind training is, in a certain sense, I just want to use this kind of jokingly in a way, it's a sham. It's a sham because there is never a moment before this life, during this life, or after this life when we are not training our minds. So it's not an issue of you train the mind when you do mind training. That would actually be a little better. The problem is that we train our minds when we're doing the worst things too. And we don't recognize it as mind training, but we're actually doing the very thing. Then we go to the mind training group, and now we have to get over these things that we've been training. There's a certain kind of confusion embodied in all of that. And yet, it's really helpful if we have trained our minds, which we could say, I met someone today who I hoped appreciated me, but actually they lambasted me and like really insulted and criticized and did all these things, and now I find I really don't like them. And then I really intentionally don't like them for a few days. And then I go to the mind training group and I realize, why is it so hard? It was so easy a week ago, and now it's so hard because we just trained ourselves in another way. It's not really any different than doing yoga or some kind of physical thing. You stop doing it or you do it wrong for a while, then it's difficult to do. Mind training is really just that thing. It's maybe it's helpful to think of it as being kind of mystical and mysterious. And in a certain way, I think it is, because we can train our own minds in such amazing ways without even thinking that we're training them. It almost seems at times like the more powerful training is the training we don't recognize that we're doing, because we do that training day and night all the time. If we did the Lojong practices, the mind training practices, the way that we normally just train our minds absent-mindedly, we'd probably all be enlightened. But fortunately, that one of the biggest pieces of the mind training is to recognize the downside of our foibles around it. So there's never a moment when we can't give rise to the clear aspiration that there is not a single sentient being, human or otherwise, even the very historically horrible individuals, there is not a single one who does not deserve insight, the experience of having others feel compassion for them, the experience of compassion themselves, happiness, an unbridled sense of complete satisfaction, all of these things. So we can always come back to that. No matter what I did yesterday, it is still true. I can still give rise in my own mind stream that all sentient beings deserve to be cared for. They deserve to experience loving kindness. They deserve to experience being appreciated in a kind of universal sense of equanimity and joy. I think it's helpful to just remind ourselves of that. Not just everybody else, but me also. I deserve it. They deserve it. The problem isn't that they deserve it. The problem is that we forget, and we actually take refuge in the causes of misery as often as we do anything else. And often by the time we recognize that, we have a kind of hopeless feeling. So that's why we have Sangha, really. So that we have people who will remind us that it's okay. Anything else?
So I have a question about about the crystal mall and the blue lotus, with
What did you call it?
the crystal mala and
Oh, the crystal mala.
Yeah,
Yeah.
am I not speaking clearly?
Yeah.
I remember on Sunday, if I'm remembering correctly, you said that the crystal mala was magnetizing. I'm curious, what do those two things symbolize?
What's the two?
What do the crystal mala and the lotus that Chenrezig are holding symbolize?
I see. Well, there's a little mistake in what you said. It's not that the crystal mala is magnetizing. The crystal mala, so I'll use that word again, is the symbol that points to Chenrezig's ability to draw people out of the depths of samsara. Right?
Mm-hmm.
All of the elements of Chenrezig's dress, the four arms, for example, are point to Chenrezig's complete embodiment of the four immeasurables. It doesn't really mean that the four arms are the four immeasurables, but some people practice like that too. I find it more useful to think of it as Chenrezig is the embodiment of the four immeasurables. That's like the foundation of practice of Chenrezig. You can say the same thing with Tara, with pretty much all of the practices. The foundation is the four immeasurables. So the symbols vary from one deity to another. Sometimes the same symbol will act as pointing to one thing, and it will point to another thing with another deity, the exact same thing. And those things switch around a bit. You can think of them also as kind of reminders. It's helpful to draw us there. Now the lotus. In this moment, my dented brain is drawing a blank on the lotus. Will you tell me?
I didn't hear
The lotus. Remind me what it is.
the lotus is the symbol of purity growing out of the dirty water.
That's it. Yeah. Thank you so much. I so easily forget from you can look forward to it, the same process when you get older. It's like, anyway, yes, it's a very important symbol. It's as important as the four immeasurables. The lotus, we all know, grows out of mud. Not out of mud, but muddy ponds and places like that. And kind of miraculously, no matter how muddy the pond is, the lotus still remains pure white. So that is then a symbol which points, it can be understood in a number of ways, that each one of us really is a lotus in that pond, or any pond. And we can think of that from the perspective of a number of ways. If you personally suffer from the habit of anger, from the habit of judgment, from the habit of greed, from the habit of, picking your friends and paying more attention to them as opposed to those people you don't like, all of these things which we would ordinarily call at some level a defilement. It's not where we want to be. And yet it's also true that in some way that's where we all are. So it's helpful to kind of get all of that. But if we see our own foible around it, we're less likely, let me put it in a positive way, we're more likely to abandon things like judgment, especially unreasonable judgment. So in that way, we can look at other beings and think, no matter what I'm seeing is all the things I don't like about them and other people, then we have to recall they're actually inherently a lotus. So even a lotus, sometimes a water buffalo will crawl into the pond and the lotuses will get some mud on them. So it's like we wouldn't go there and say, oh, lotuses are not really pure white because it got mud on it or something. We really mean that beneath whatever it is that is the problem, there is something pure, always there. And it's helpful to have a sense of what that purity is. All right?
Thank you.
Shall we dedicate the merit? May I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state. Thank you for this evening. Nice evening. Even in a sauna. It's pretty good. Even in a sauna. It's pretty much where we are.